Hello, my name is Jim. This is my podcast, The Bloody Vegans. You're very welcome to it. Welcome to episode 4. Each week, I'll be travelling ever deeper into the world of veganism, discovering along the way a multitude of viewpoints, from the political and ethical to the practical. And I'll be doing this through a series of conversations, each aiming to further illuminate my understanding, and hopefully yours, of all things plant-centric. This week is no different. We're going to be speaking with author and illustrator Sara Botero. Sara has just released her first book, The Essential Vegan Toolkit. I would thoroughly recommend it. Having heard Sara speak at the Reading Vegan Festival, I felt compelled to buy a copy of this book. And it is a fantastic guide for people who are kind of vegan curious, new vegans, or even folks who've been vegan for a long, long time. So without further ado, this is me and Sara Botero.
I just flew around my user Acre 20, had a radar hit, and I was swinging with like 30 knots, and there was something there. It looked like it didn't look like a bird, it looked like they were getting a rock with me.
Well, first of all, congratulations on the book.
Thank you.
Absolutely love it. So The Essential Vegan Toolkit is the name of Sara's book. So I bought a copy at the Reading Vegan Festival this year.
Thank you.
No, it was my pleasure. It's amazing, and it was after listening to your talk actually, and I think it just offers this it covers an incredible amount of ground in the book. There's a huge gamut of subjects. I was bowled over by it, and kind of under the sort of the big headers, if you like, of why and how, and then it goes a little bit further. And I'd say I've been vegan 2.5 years, and it's definitely a sort of an invaluable resource that I would keep going back to.
I'm so glad.
Yeah. So and have done already. What compelled you to create it in the first place?
Well, a bit like you said, I wanted to be for new vegans. I wanted to be a book that I could have had when I first went vegan, but at the same time, my aim was also for it to be useful for people who have been vegan for a while. So it's really good to hear that you've been vegan for 2.5 years and you're finding lots of value from it, because that's exactly what I wanted. I wanted for it to be a place, kind of like a reference guide that you could come back to it again and again, and help people on their journey, because it's always a journey. Some people do go vegan for a year and then for whatever reason stop being vegan. So I wanted it to be something that carries on with them through their adventures and journey as a vegan, and help them as much as possible to kind of stay on that journey, on that vegan journey, however it might look like for them. So like you said, there's the why, and I think it's very important, because with anything in life, we need to have a motivation, because if we don't, it's very easy to falter, and we do live in a non-vegan world, so the default is being omnivores, not vegan. So to have the reasons, what happens to animals in animal agriculture, how it impacts the environment, how it potentially can impact our health, just very important to have those kind of handy in your pocket, to reach for whenever we're finding it a bit difficult.
And what kind of compelled you in the first place to become vegan? I know you cover this in the book.
I've always wanted to be, not always, but since an early age, I've wanted to be vegetarian. Probably my teens, 12, I watched an episode where Lisa goes vegetarian, and it just made sense to me. I loved animals so much, and here was a way of living, being vegetarian, that meant that you didn't have to eat animals that had been killed so they could be on your plate. And I very much wanted that. At the time, my parents weren't supportive, and I didn't really pursue it. And for a long time, I didn't even know what veganism was. And then when I did, it was like, no eggs, no dairy, no anything. I kind of thought, well, that's a bit much. Like, it's a bit extreme. Like, I just thought they were doing it from a point of sort of sainty, like I just won't touch anything that's got to do with animals, because I genuinely didn't see what was wrong with milk, eggs. It kind of seemed like surplus or whatever.
Yeah.
So I never saw myself being vegan, but then I met my first vegan at university, a good friend, Maria, and like just seeing somebody cook, it was easy, it was delicious food, it wasn't a big deal. And then later on doing my own research, finding out, that mothers get separated from their babies and how it's very cruel, the dairy industry and the egg industry. And I thought, well, I'm vegetarian for the animals. Doesn't really make sense to carry on consuming these products that directly have a negative impact. So that was kind of it was a relatively long journey, but their motivation for me was the animals, really, at the end of it.
Yeah. Once you found different pieces of information, did you kind of snap in each of those subjects quite quickly? So like once you'd heard about dairy, was it like, right, that's it?
Yes and no. And that I think the reason why we're not vegan or vegetarians is this sort of dissociation. We see a block of cheese and we just think, oh, that's yummy. We don't actually see, what goes on behind that. And so when I watched Dairy Scary, it was a little bit of a switch in that I thought I can't eat cheese and I can't eat milk, so I gave it to my housemate. But I still consumed it in products that they were part of, like I bought Maryland cookies or I don't know, some other kind of products that had dairy or eggs in them. I didn't consume them in their in inverted commas purest form, but over time I did also cut them out. I think it was just you kind of feel a little bit less guilty that you think there's not that much of it.
Right.
But over time you kind of found alternatives and you kind of realized actually there's no point me carrying on.
Yeah, I totally get that disassociation point. Like the further removed you are, the easier it is, and definitely when it comes to like you say, when it's an ingredient within something, it sort of feels
you almost
like,
don't see it.
Yeah, it's almost like it feels so infinitesimal. In a cookie.
Yeah,
like, it's no big deal, right?
Exactly.
I can't be doing that much harm. But then as you start to think about that more,
and as you start to realize that actually there are alternatives and you can do without, and a lot of it is habit. With when it comes to food, and so for me, after a while, it was easy to be actually, you know what, I'm gonna give it up completely. But it did take a little while. And I think that's also something that I cover in my book, that the going vegan or cutting out animal products looks different for everybody, and it happens in different timelines for everybody. And I'm not really. I don't want people to come from a judging point of view, because it took me a while, but I'm here now, and some people do it overnight, some people it takes longer. It's kind of it's difficult because you hear some vegans sort of saying, well, if you're doing it slowly, like you're not thinking about the animals, and it's to some degree, yes. You kind of are right, but we do live at the end of the day in a non-vegan world, and it isn't the easiest, and there's lots of other variables that can make it difficult for somebody to go vegan. So I think shaming doesn't really help.
No, I'd agree. There's far more forces pressing on you to do that, to live that way, to live that omnivorous life, than there is kind of pulls, if you like, taking you away from it. So I think it does take a degree of strength, and that for some people will take some time to get to. And the kind of kindness message, I think, is probably more attractive, more likely to help people to get to that place than the message of you're either in or you're out.
Yeah, exactly. Like I have some friends that go, oh, I think it's really great that you're vegan, but I could never give up cheese. And I go, well, you don't have to. You can, if you think you can give up meat, then you can do that. Like it's not all or nothing kind of thing. Yeah,
that's a good start, and maybe you can move on from there if you want to.
Yeah,
that's really cool. So I love this fact that sort of this thread throughout the book of the idea that you can at times like really deal with some of the hard hitting facts of each of the kind of animal agriculture aspects of those industries. You don't shy away from those. You say exactly what they are.
Yeah.
But you do it with this kind of like this sort of there's kind of a really nice juxtaposition with the artwork. So there's this like beautiful kind of like cartoon like almost innocent, creative illustrations that go alongside some really hard hitting facts.
Yeah.
Was that like a real creative choice? Was that just the art form you enjoyed?
I think a bit of both. I think I found it incredibly hard researching for the animal chapter because what I've included, it doesn't actually encapsulate everything that goes on in the animal, in animal agriculture. And I did a lot of crying through my research because it's just, as a vegan, you kind of think, oh yes, lots of horrible things happen. But one thing is knowing that, and then one thing is reading reports. And a lot of the times the reports that I read are from the animal agriculture.
Right.
Because they put guidelines in, but they put guidelines in for really horrendous things. And they're trying to increase the welfare and saying, actually, the numbers of pigs that their tails get chopped off has gone down, etc. And it's like a positive thing. And you think, well, actually, this is quite horrendous. So it was very difficult to read and write the chapters. And I didn't want to shy away for fear of scaring people off from the facts, because at the end of the day, it is what the animals have to live through, and it is what they live through, right now, every day. And it would do a disservice to them. And I guess with the illustrations, it is kind of my illustration style. I also didn't want to shy away from sharing all the facts, but I didn't want it to be too traumatizing. Reading through the chapters, and I wanted it in general. I wanted the book to be quite engaging. I wanted it to be for somebody who's already vegan, or somebody who's reading, or somebody who's interested in veganism, and for them to sort of be drawn in through the illustrations. Sometimes quite fun, sometimes quite sad, but just for them to be engaged throughout the book.
I think it absolutely achieves that 100%, like engages people. I'll give you an example. So I've had that since I bought the book. I've had it on my kitchen table, and I'll kind of dip into it now and then. My wife will. My little boy occasionally, he's far too small to read it, but he likes the pictures.
I'm glad.
But what I've found is lots of kind of omnivorous folk, non-vegans, friends and family, are kind of drawn in. The book looks really aesthetically pleasing, and even as they're reading, they're kind of, you can see the sort of almost the disconnect of like, I'm really enjoying the artwork, and then there's like is that a real fact? Is that a real thing? And then and it's led to these great discussions. And one of them in particular, I'd love to get your kind of like your view on, because it's in fact somebody I went and spoke to somebody today, a non-vegan, who was talking to me about honey, and it's one of those questions, I think, for like, as you're transitioning into the vegan world, you feel like you need to be equipped with the right answer.
I think that's the kind of one of the hardest things of being a new vegan, is that people expect you to just be a vegan encyclopedia.
And the book gave me exactly that kind of answer to have in those
tricky
kind
moments.
of discussions. So tell us a little bit about that kind of honey story, because I think for lots of people, that's probably, particularly people who are listening to this who are transitioning into veganism, it would probably be one of those questions they want to ask.
I think you tackle everything as you feel comfortable, whatever you feel you can give up, etc. But I think it tends to be that, for me anyway, honey was, I think, pretty much one of the last things to go. And it's not, and I actually don't even enjoy honey. So it's funny that it stuck around, but I think it is because of that disconnect that I think one is bees are sort of seen as sort of insects, and maybe they don't feel, and they're not as cuddly as cute little piglets and baby cows and that kind of thing. But the other thing is that you think, well, the bees are in decline, and we need to support our local bee growers and bee production and that kind of thing, and what's the harm?
And arguably, the guy I spoke to today was telling me that it's a really good thing that we need to do this, because obviously the bee populations are in decline.
Yeah.
The whole of humanity is dependent upon them.
Yeah.
And therefore, the best way to sort of keep them in kind of good health, if you like, is to buy honey. Yeah.
And so I kind of towards the beginning of my vegan journey, I was kind of in two minds of, I'm an environmentalist, so should I be helping the bees, but also kind of the vegan people say that I shouldn't be eating honey, and I don't even like honey, but I don't really know what to do. And so I was kind of in two minds about it. At the end, I gave it up because I simply thought, just from principle of that it's something that the bees work incredibly hard to make. I don't really enjoy it anyway, so it was, for me, it was kind of easy at the end to give it up. But I didn't really knew exactly where I stood. And it was only listening to a podcast by, I don't know if you know Jonathan Van Ness, JVN from Queero.
Yeah.
He's got a podcast called Getting Curious, and he had a bee specialist on.
Sure. Yeah.
And they were talking about the bee population and what they should be doing and And he went on to say that, I can't remember exactly the numbers, but it's something like there are thousands and thousands of different species of bees, and they come in all shapes and sizes. You got black bees, you got purple bees. They're an amazing creature, and of those thousands and thousands in the world, there's only about 6 honeybees that create honey in the way that we know, and really only one of those we know as the honeybee in sort of the Western world. And so when I kind of put that into perspective, I was like, whoa, I didn't know that at all. And I started doing more research, and yes, turns out the honeybee, their numbers are fine. It is the other thousands and thousands of different bees that are in decline and are at risk. And those are the bees that we don't, kind of the bumblebee. We see the bumblebee, and the bumblebee doesn't make honey like the honeybee does. But they're good pollinators, or there's other bees where they burrow into the ground and they nest sort of solitary. And there's so many bees that we just don't see. We don't see what's going on. And I guess, went to a bit of rambling, what I'm saying is that the honeybees that produce honey that we see in the shelves aren't at risk. It's all the other bees that are. And by actually subsidizing honeybees, we're actually creating competition for the other bees, for food, and not only for food, but as well because of how intensively produced honey is. There are things like parasites, diseases, and those can then spread to other native bees and create risk that way. So there really isn't a reason to be subsidizing honey making for environmental reasons. And something I read in an article online, it's kind of like thinking that, let's say, the kingfisher is in decline. I'm not sure if it is, but just hypothetically.
Yeah, sure.
But it's at risk. The population is going down. And we grow chickens because they're birds. and we think we're helping the
Sure.
bird population, and it doesn't work out that way. So it's been really great to have that information at hand, and as well because not only because it's misspreading information that it's actually helping the bees when it's actually not helping the bees, but I also read this amazing book called The Bees, and it's the perspective of a worker bee, flora, and the hierarchy of bees, how they work, how they use their body to communicate the distance, from the sun, if there's any predators to other bees, how complex they are, how hard they work for the bee that they produce, the honey that they produce to survive through the winter, and then for us to take it away and replace it with a sugar substitute or with less honey that they need. It's not fair at all. So in animal rights point of view, in environmentalist point of view, it's just, and in health aspects, I researched, and the honey does have some micronutrients, but they're so trace that they're actually only designed to be beneficial to the bees.
Funnily enough,
yeah, nature works very well in that. Yes, it's sugar, and sugar gives us energy, but apart from that, there's no other nutrients, health benefits. So for either front, it's not really helping the bees, the planet, or us.
It's interesting this point you make about that ultimately kind of anything that can be kind of monetized, if you like. Funny enough, the populations of that thing are fine.
Yes, exactly. Like sometimes I've had people argue to me, but if we stop eating cows, they would go extinct. And I go, well, so what? There are thousands of species of insects and other animals that have gone extinct because of directly because of animal agriculture, and nobody is saying anything about it or worrying about it. The only reason that you would care that the cow goes extinct is because they're yummy.
Yeah.
And they benefit, us humans in some ways.
Yeah, certainly financially.
Yeah, exactly.
Exactly, yeah. So the question and answer section of the book I absolutely loved, like being having gone through the kind of the vegan journey over the last couple of years. Every single one of those questions was like pulled from a moment within those 2 years, and it couldn't be more accurate.
Oh, I'm so glad, because it was also hard because like you said, I did cover a lot, and I realize that now. And all the time it was supposed to be 150 pages, but I kept thinking, I want to add this, I want to add that. And there's always more that I could have added, but it's good to know that what I did add has brought value. Oh,
huge value, particularly the Q&A bit. And I was kind of looking through them recently, and in fact, because of I'd seen a fair bit in the media, particularly around like avocados and almonds in particular. The kind of water usage, the travel that goes into those, and then people kind of saying, well, if I eat locally sourced, grass-fed, whatever it is, animal product, then surely that's better than your avocado or your almond. And I'd just love to get your kind of thoughts firsthand on that.
Yeah, I think sometimes people use that as a genuine argument, in that they do worry about the resources that are used, and I think fair enough. However, a lot of the times it is used as a defense, sort of a defensive argument, to say, well, I buy organic meat from down the farm, and you use mobile phones, and you eat avocados, and you eat almonds, so get off your high horse. Not that we would be, because we're vegan, but metaphorically high horse. And in that regards, it's not helpful in any way, shape, or form. But also, if we do look into it, there was a study done by the Oxford University, and the researcher, through his studies and researching and creating this paper, ultimately went vegan because of everything that he found out. And he says that even leading a vegan life, that you're eating foods that are transported from faraway places in packaging, etc. Because other people would be like, oh well, I get my meat from the butchers and I bring my own Tupperware. So even taking into account distance, packaging, processing, it is still the ecological carbon footprint is still smaller to be vegan than it is to eat meat. So that's good to know. It doesn't mean that we can't buy locally produced when we can and be mindful of always trying to reduce our impact wherever we can do. If that is, buying oat milk over almond milk. But it doesn't mean that it should be used as a argument against veganism because, we can always do better.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, again, it comes back to that idea of like almost absolutism. Like you're either completely perfect, or there's no point.
Yeah,
and it doesn't really work like that.
No. I think we should be somewhere in the middle of. We're always working on it with the information that we have, kind of where we can in our lives make those changes. And once we know that this. Maybe if you buy avocados from Peru, or you buy a lot of quinoa, or and you realize the impact it has on the local environment and how modern slavery is really a big thing, and we can minimize and we can swap to something else. If we can do it, then there's no reason to do it. It's kind of like sometimes people go, oh well, I'm not vegan because there's more important things to be worrying about. And it's like, yes, there are lots of things, but you don't get to just pick one cause. You can be vegan and also very much care about human rights and be wanting to better yourself in multiple ways. And in fact, going vegan has allowed me to kind of broaden my circle of how I impact and how my actions do have a consequence. And that kind of has led me, because, when you go vegan, you realize that, yes, the animals that you consume do have an impact. They have had to die for them to be in your plate. And the same thing with other things that we consume, in that, for example, I learned, again, like you said, like you watched a documentary about veganism and that helped you. I watched a documentary on the true cost of fashion, and I never realized just what went on.
Right.
And after I did, I thought, actually, I don't really want to be part of this. Kind of like how I watched Dairy is Scary, and I thought, I don't want to be part of this, the dairy industry. And so I think veganism can be a really big tool to widen people's circle of compassion, as it were.
Yeah, totally with you on that point. There's if I think back to like my journey, a similar sort of story, I guess. But I remember looking into bank accounts, and I had a bank account like most people do that they were enticed into when they were a student because they got a really nice overdraft or they got some cash back or whatever.
Yeah. And
wasn't until sort of after I'd become vegan I started to then look at kind of other aspects of my life, like my energy providers and so on. And I looked into like the financial reporting for my bank for the year and realised that they had invested a huge sum of money into fossil fuels.
Yeah.
And it was kind of like a complete like light bulb moment for me. I thought, is that a thing? And the more I thought about it, I was like, well, obviously it's a thing. Like,
yeah.
They have to invest money somewhere, and they invest it in industries that make money. So that's what they do. And then I looked for an alternative. And like you say, it's not, you don't have to restrict yourself to one cause.
No, exactly. And it's good that you brought it up, because I've been thinking about this, and I bank with HSBC, and I know through recently that yes, they do invest heavily in non-renewable energy. And like you said, you kind of think, well, actually, do I want to be part of that? And no, and that is something that I probably will take away from this. Then ask you later where you bank.
It was Triodos actually was the
Okay.
bank that I found, but that sort of information just isn't in the sort of
No,
mainstream psyche, is it?
It isn't. And I think veganism does make you, rightly so, a lot more skeptical.
Yeah.
And you do a lot more of your own research because you kind of think, well, actually, let's look into this.
You start to question things, I think, because
Yeah.
it's, I guess, like at its core, veganism is something that challenges the very rituals that are set in place by our families when we are, born.
Very much so. And like, kind of like I said in the talk, that it's kind of, I realized that a lot of the things that I thought, had been told to me by my parents, by my school, they were just simply not true. And kind of how the dairy industry invested in the sort of the campaign where, you'd give kids 1 glass of milk a day, and it's just sort of like for your healthy bones, when actually research shows that actually that doesn't really correlate. And so, all this information that we've been given, and it is driven again by profit.
Yeah.
And so you kind of go, oh, okay, all these things that I trusted in information, actually, I'm not as trusting as I used to be. And I think ultimately it's a really good thing to be challenging and to be asking questions about how things are done, and because why should they carry on being done just because they've always been done that way?
Yeah. I think that's why it makes it so sort of difficult sometimes, the transition, particularly with the people closest to them.
Yeah.
Because they're ultimately challenging. I think there's a perception that if I'm saying to my parents, like, I don't want to eat meat anymore, or dairy or whatever, that I'm challenging the belief system that they instilled in me.
Yeah.
And that's really difficult for people to sort of, like, for parents to deal with.
Definitely. It's almost like you're saying you parented me wrong.
Yeah.
You're not, but it does, I think it can potentially feel like that for them.
Yeah.
I think in that case, you kind of just have to do you.
Yeah.
And kind of say, no, like, you obviously, you did what you thought was right, because they went on with and if I hadn't found out about veganism, I probably would have done the same thing with my kids.
Yeah.
And so we just do the best that we can with the information that we have at the time.
Yeah. Well, exactly. And I think that comes back to this thread of, like, of kind of kindness, if you like, that I certainly picked up really loudly and clearly throughout your book.
Yeah.
Is this kind of idea of being kind to those around us.
Yeah.
And the idea that kind of information kind of hits us all at different stages.
Completely.
But whether it be the banking thing we just talked about, our parents, etc. On the note of the parents thing, actually, I heard a great kind of argument to kind of help, if you like, people who are struggling with kind of parents who perhaps feel a bit almost rejected.
Yeah.
And it was kind of I had never thought about it like this before, but it was kind of almost you've raised me to challenge, you've raised me to have positive, like a positive challenging of and questioning of things.
And of, like, growing and bettering myself, and that you've created me as I am. And so me going out into the world and questioning things and finding out and learning more, and it's kind of part of it. I really like that.
It really, I'd literally, this was about 2 weeks ago I'd heard this, and I thought I wish I'd heard that a couple of years ago. Because it would have been, I certainly felt a little, I mean, I was a lot older, I wasn't sort of like living at home or anything like that, but still there was an element of resistance, particularly around those sort of ritual moments, whether it be Christmas or Easter or somebody's birthday or something.
Yeah, it almost feels, I think sometimes family can feel like a bit begrudging that you're sort of trying to make things difficult, when that's the last thing me as a people pleaser, like, that's the last thing I want to do is make things difficult. But you get to a certain point where you think, actually, I'm not okay with participating. You do you, but it's just, but that's the thing with veganism, that a lot of the times we're kind of saying, you do you, I'm doing me. Like, this is just what is important to me, and this is just what I'm doing, and that's the kind of stance that I take with all my friends. But you say that and people still come at you like you've said something completely different, like how could you be killing animals, like because they kind of almost hear it without it being said, not that you're thinking it or anything, but people do get very defensive when you say that you're vegan or that you don't eat animal products, or they take it as an attack. I found
I think that's a fairly like common experience. Do you think that that's born out of perhaps a kind of like I almost want you to prove it to me, I want you to tell me why I should do it? There's sort of almost
I think it's kind of like, if I go back to when I wasn't vegan, is I think I saw myself as an animal lover, and to then see somebody else who also classifies themselves as an animal lover, but then doesn't eat this because the reason is that it's harmful to animals, it indirectly challenges your own perception of yourself as an animal lover, and you kind of have to question, well, like, why do I do these things? So you kind of have to find ways to defend why you have this ethic of being an animal lover, but this kind of duality that you also eat them or eat products that directly harm them. And then it's something, it's more like you're kind of having an internal battle with yourself, but then you use the person in front of you to kind of portray that.
I think you're spot on. It's almost like challenge these views for me, because I probably innately somewhere feel a little uncomfortable with that idea. Like, I'm an animal lover, but I know I eat animals. I don't feel particularly comfortable with that. So if I'm going to like push it to its logical conclusion with you, like can you bear it out for me one way or the other?
And I sometimes find that the friends that are the most defensive are the ones that sometimes come around the quickest, because the reason that they're so defensive is because it does really challenge them and it upsets them. And then as soon as they kind of run through all the different arguments, a lot of the times they kind of fall into actually it would be nice to be vegan, or that would kind of align with what I believe, but at the moment it's too hard for X, Y, Z or whatever. Or they go, I'm going to start cutting out things or whatever. But again, I think I would have found it very annoying, and this is just from a completely ego point of view, that had I gone vegan and then my friend sort of tells other people like, oh, I turned her vegan, or kind of takes claim over that. And I think because ultimately we don't want anyone to control us, and we want to feel like we are responsible for all our decisions. And we are. Like, nobody can make us do anything. So yes, that person might have given you lots of information, inspiration, but at the end of the day, when we make a decision, it's coming from us. No one can make us go vegan. Ultimately, it is our decision. And I think we always want to sort of hold on to that.
That autonomy is like incredibly important to each one of us, isn't it? That sort of individuality and kind of a liberation, if you like. Which is ironic, considering the kind of, we don't necessarily feel like that about other species, but that's the nature of the world we live in. So how do you balance this idea of like activism? Because you talk about this in the book, this idea of like almost I saw this when I read it as like the next stage. Like I now feel in a pretty comfortable place as a vegan myself, but I feel like I want to get involved from an activism point of view. How do you balance that with the idea of this thread of kind of kindness and acceptance?
I think I also introduced only the activism chapter one because I think it's I just like any type of activism that is creating positive change. But I think it can also from not a selfish point, but from a beneficial point for the person doing the activism, is that once we do go vegan, we find out all these horrendous facts, and we kind of start thinking about how, animals are being killed right now in this very moment, and hundreds, and there's so much suffering going on right this minute, and it can feel very overwhelming, and it can feel very alienating, especially if you don't have vegan friends or family or whatever. You can feel very alone in this kind of suffering, and so I think then activism can be a very powerful tool to not feel like we can't do anything about it. And so I think we can be kind through our activism, in the sense that shaming is never really going to help. I mean, it might do to some people, but it's not something that I like. But I think there are ways of simply putting out the information out there that a lot of us aren't aware of in regards to animal agriculture, so that people can then do what they like having that information, because I didn't have that information for a very long time. And so simply the act of using activism to spread awareness, and that can be that can be done in a very kind way, because it's just putting it out there and seeing how people respond to it. And for some people, some people share very graphic footage, and for some people it works. But then also for some people, I think we should be also very wary of sharing footage when, we're just having a nice time scrolling through Facebook, and we may not be aware that some people suffer from PTSD, some people have anxiety, some people have depression, some people, are going through things that we can't possibly imagine. And then for very graphic footage to arrive into our little bubble without warning, it can have detrimental impact on people's mental well-being. So I think in kindness in that aspect would be putting a trigger warning so that people can consent to saying, yes, I want to find out what is going on in this footage. I want to, or they might go, I don't think I can handle it right now. But then ultimately it is down to them, and we're not taking away that kind of right to choose. So that's kind of kindness. And ultimately remembering that, I think as a vegan, you weren't vegan, then you find out all this information, then you start on your vegan journey, and then there's a learning curve where you're learning all about ingredients and this and that, and making new food and making new friends. And then after a while, it just becomes the new norm. And you go, well, being vegan is easy. And it is. Like, for me, I find it easy, but it wasn't always like this. There was a learning curve, and I didn't always have this knowledge, and I didn't always feel this comfortable in my veganism. And there was times where, pre-being vegan, that I ate every animal product imaginable under the earth, and I enjoyed it thoroughly. And it's remembering that for the majority of us, there are some people who have been vegan, vegetarian from birth, but for the majority of us, we were there. And it was our life. And I would probably gotten very pissed off if somebody started having a go at me. Because that's just our kind of human nature, is to get defensive and go, whoa, why are you having a go at me? And we probably would just shut down and not really hear what is being said. And I guess that's when the kindness of, and it can be very frustrating as a vegan or an activist when you know of all the horrible things that go on, to have kindness towards. But at the end of the day, humans are animals too. And it's not individually each human's fault what is going on. It's kind of society, and we're all kind of born out of that. And yeah, I guess just kind of remembering that we were all in that place at one point, and we wouldn't have, I would definitely wouldn't have taken it very very nicely if somebody just started having a go at me.
No, exactly, and it's I spoke about this in my conversation with Chris in the sort of first episode about that exact idea of as you go through down the rabbit hole we described it, and you find out more and more and more, and you become more and more passionate because of what you've seen and what you've learned, and it then becomes quite difficult to not want to, especially if I find ironically the more I kind of care about people, the less I want them to take part in that. So I find that always a challenge to balance the wanting to be supportive and kind and gentle in their sort of discovery of that information, respectful of their autonomy and so on, balancing that with the passion and the fervour I feel for us not doing this damage that we're doing.
Yeah, exactly. Because on the one hand, that kindness and not being aggressive, and it's the best approach. And then on the other hand, we've got the fact that hundreds in this very moment, hundreds and thousands of animals are being killed right now, and you kind of think, well, there's no time to waste.
Exactly.
The sooner the better. And you kind of just the thing is, I think the suffering is not always in your mind, because I think it would be difficult to live our life, but it is much more present. And I kind of described it to a friend how when you stop differentiating between different animals, and the dissociation kind of lessens in that you see sausage or pork pie and you see the pig, it's kind of like, I said to him, it's kind of like if you went to a shop and you saw packages and packages of dog meat, and you see them, and that maybe it's the same breed of dog that you have. And you see them in all shapes and forms, and you see people enjoying them, you see people eating them, and you kind of think, if you actually put yourself in that situation where you're surrounded by people eating dog meat, you would go like, what the fuck?
Yeah.
Like, stop, guys, what are you doing? Whereas obviously we live in a world where it's normal to eat pigs and chickens, but why is it any different from a dog? And it isn't, but society kind of has taught us that it's okay. But I think as a vegan, that's why sometimes it can be a little bit hard to put forward the kindness, because it can sometimes feel like we're putting the kindness over the animals, but I don't think we are, because at the end, if we get aggressive, and it's also not going to turn people vegan quicker. It's not going to help the animals. I don't know. I think it's a very tricky line of how assertive to be in your.
It is, isn't it? Yeah, it really is. And I think although their message is extremely non-violent, I think there's almost that. The message of Extinction Rebellion and Animal Rebellion has kind of been made, certainly in the public viewpoint, the media, etc., has been made an aggressive stance, even when, in fact, it's not. In the main, there may have been isolated incidents, but I think overall the organisation is a non-violent one. The message is clear there.
Completely.
But there's certainly a sense, I think, in mainstream media, certainly I just thinking of conversations I've heard, around and about, just going about my daily life, where people have almost painted those activists as some sort of extreme or stoppage, or some sort of aggressive move in stopping daily life.
Yeah, and I think, and it would be funny if it wasn't so, if our climate situation wasn't so dire, but the fact that people view it as a disruption, as an annoyance, when we're just trying to say, hey, people, we're heading into people already are dying because of climate change, and let's do something about it, because not having running water, not having food, that's a more of a disruption than being late to work. But it's, I guess it's also society and the government in general, that it's kind of easier to turn around and point at the other humans and be like, oh, you're getting in my way, instead of going, actually, the system is a little bit fucked and it's not really working. And we're basically the messages of being, hey, things aren't great, we should do something about it, and we should get the government to do something about it. And instead of people going, yeah, we need to challenge the government, something needs to be done, they go, oh, you're being so annoying.
Yeah.
It's easier to turn on each other than it is sort of challenge the government and society and the system.
Yeah, it's like challenging the fire alarm rather than the fire. Do you know what I
Yeah.
mean? It's like the people sounding the alarm are not necessarily where the focus of our frustration should be.
Yeah, I should do a little comic on that, on the fire alarm. I like that.
Yeah, absolutely. Are you ultimately optimistic that with the right level of kind of information, we can make the changes either on an individual or a large scale that we need to make?
Yes and no. No, in that climate change is already claiming, hundreds and thousands of lives, and many activists it's already very dire. So not in that respect, in that we're already kind of in it, and
We're pressing on with that one, aren't we? Unfortunately,
we're already a little bit.
Yeah.
What's the non? We're a little bit fucked. I didn't know how to say that in a nice way. And so not in that regard, but I think humans are. The trouble is that humans are very ingenious when we want to be, but at the moment, in the UK, in places where it's not, climate change is not being felt, people are not going to change because it's not being felt, and they'd rather carry on with their lives than to change and be a little bit uncomfortable now for a better future, because I think that's just the way that we're wired, that it's more about what is happening right now rather than, and it's how politics works, that it's not long term, it's very much what is happening right now and how it's impacting me. So I'm mixed in that we do have the capacity to get together and make great changes and do things differently. I just don't know whether we will do quick enough. I don't know. I'm to be honest, I'm not terrified. I just see it as this sort of scary future, and it's hopefully I'll be going to do a master's next year, and I'm kind of seeing it as more of, okay, a lot of horrible things are going to happen, food shortages. It's kind of like, what are we going to do to then solve these issues that are already happening? We're already seeing with, like, I shop sometimes from a zero waste store, and you see shortages of certain foods. They send emails, and that's because the places where they're grown, there's drought, and this is right now, and it's just gonna get worse and worse. So I don't know. I'm not that hopeful, actually. Sorry.
Well, no, I think you've got a pretty pragmatic sense of it. Like I think it would be naive of us to sort of and almost is part of the problem that we see this as an impending issue, rather than an issue that is actually happening now.
Issue. Yeah.
So I think you're right to kind of call that out. I think it's damage limitation is probably what the place we're in right now.
Yeah, that's a good word. And I think also as humans, we're kind of just always hoping that this sort of magical thing will come along and be like, oh, we've made this amazing machine that's going to capture the carbon in the atmosphere, and actually we're okay. That's not going to happen. we are going to have to do the sort of nitty gritty work of behavior change within our society. That is what is going to really shift things along. It's not going to be some fancy new technology that kind of comes along and saves the day, because that's not really going to happen.
No, I think it's incumbent upon all of us really and I think that's probably where I agree with you, but I do have a sense of optimism insofar as when I see Extinction Rebellion, Animal Rebellion, people out, in force on the streets, making a noise, wanting their voices to be heard, and also I see veganism being monetized in a sort of strange way that, although it's not systematic change, it sort of tells me that the system is working out there is a way to monetize this, and that gives me some hope. Yeah.
I think, not to burst your bubble, but
You're gonna burst my bubble. So.
No, not really. It's just that I think I thought that at some point about kind of the system seeing, there's veganism and we can make money from it, and ultimately the animals would benefit. But kind of with what I've seen with, Burger King and some other companies, is that it tends to be companies that aren't vegan. They see the market in veganism and they just expand. And so they carry on with their, and I think ultimately, the demand and supply would change, but I think we can't buy our way. And I think that's kind of what society, capitalism, whatever wants to tell us, that we can buy our way out of, and we can change the system through. And that's not to say that, our money does count as a vote. And so whenever possible, I try and support companies that are, vegan as they are, and ethical companies that, pay their workers and all these kind of things. But I think, again, it goes back to, it's kind of going to be down to people to change and not just kind of buying our way out of it. But I am hopeful in that. I am thankful that climate change is kind of at the forefront and it is being talked about. I think I just get scared that it's just another little passing thing, and we just kind of have to keep at it.
Sure. Yeah.
And also it should have, and it's also very frustrating because it's been around for 60, 70 years and there's already protests back then and nothing happened. It's just, so it's just all of this should have happened a long time ago, and we shouldn't really be in this predicament. But I do have hope in people at the end of the day.
Yeah. If not en masse as individuals who can then form groups. In not the kind of society and capitalism and the government, not in them so much as more. I do feel like people will get together, and there is, I think as well, I'm very much interested in community projects, and I think that's when it gives me hope, when you sort of see people, nobody's telling them to buy kitchens or repair cafes or hack space, or there's lots of things going on in Reading, but they're just doing it, and that's when I feel a lot happier. Yeah. Well, or like you said, like hunt saboteurs. Nobody's telling them to go out and prevent foxes and badgers and getting killed, but they see it, that it's happening, and they want to do something about it, and they go out and they do it. Yeah. So I think that's when people organizing and getting together and making a difference just through their own initiative, then that does make me very happy. Well, I think you're certainly inspiring lots of people to take individual action, hopefully start to collaborate through your book. So a big thank you for creating it, and a big thank you for talking to me today.
Oh, it's been a pleasure. Thank you for having me.
No problem. Thanks so much, Sara.